I need to stop saying we're live because we're not literally live.
Well, we used to do it live, right?
Yeah.
Why did we
scary.
stop doing that?
I think there's a couple times where we're like, maybe we should have cut that out. So I was tired of like having that like buyer's remorse.
That doesn't apply.
Trying to tie this into generosity.
Saying something that I do feel more freedom to say whatever I feel like I can say and then let you edit it out later.
All that to say, I've yet to edit anything out.
Yeah, for better or for worse.
So I wanted to go live so that we can actually field questions and answer them as they're coming. I wonder if we should make a special one next week because it's the end.
Oh, that's
so we kind of like advertise, hey, at this time, me and Pastor Caleb are going to be live and you can ask your questions.
We usually podcast Monday mornings.
I know, so people are working.
Yeah.
That's the other hard part.
Yeah, what do you do? When do you do a live? What is the YouTube?
The YouTube wisdom is, well, because this is local, a lot of people go live around like 3 p.m. our time because like Eastern it's 6. So you want to do it like when they're on their way home or just got home. So we find a lot of success when it's like 6 or 7 o'clock when me and Jordan go live. But we don't want to be together at that time. So
I clock out at 5.
Yes.
That's a really bad mentality to have. But
is it though?
I read this might be something you want to cut out. That Facebook group we're part of, somebody posted everything you should know about being a pastor because he was talking to someone younger who's going to be a pastor. And one of the things was like, don't ever take your pastor hat off, essentially. Yeah. It was because when you do that, that creates there's a dangerous side to that where you can see yourself as someone that you're not actually in real life. So it's that balance. But all that to say, I will do 6 or 7 if you want, but
I don't think I want to.
Yeah, I'd clock out at 5. So
all right, we have a lot to talk about today. So we have been going through the definition of generosity. Do you have it memorized? Don't look. All right, I have it memorized.
We wrote it together. I want that to be clear.
Did we though?
Yes, we did. I remember the conversation.
We crafted it. I knew what the 4 would be. Then your biggest contribution was the giving like the by giving like. I was like, boom, we did craft it together. And I've been saying that every single week in the sermons.
You have, but don't
say it was only 3 words.
Guilt me for not having it memorized. I did have a contribution.
Absolutely.
To this.
We couldn't do this without you, Caleb.
Thank you.
The practice of generosity is living like disciples who trust in the God of abundance by giving like stewards who tithe to God's kingdom.
Yes. That's what I was going to say.
It helps that I have to say it every week.
You do, and you're preaching on those 4, so those are, I probably would have gotten something mixed up. But there's a sequence to it. It flows.
It flows really well.
Yeah. It's a good
I'm
definition.
Really proud of that definition.
Has anyone given you pushback or anything based for that definition?
I love how every week somebody asks me, has anybody given you pushback?
Someone asks you that every week?
Yes.
Other than me?
Someone else. It's always somebody random every week.
Because we probably prefaced it by saying, I know generosity is scary, and so people are expecting.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Is it scary?
Is generosity scary?
Is preaching on it.
Yes.
Because the whole thing, of course, is people say, nobody likes to talk about it. It's a scary topic. Why?
Why do you want me to? Well, you shared a story that was from personal experience, your history with, was it last week, this past Sunday, about you just being afraid to, did you not share that story on Sunday?
I don't know what you're talking about. Keep going.
I thought you shared something about early days. You were really afraid because you just didn't, everything's so new. You don't want to scare people away. You're trying to start a church and get them to want to give and not tell them they should give.
I was talking about how it would never be mentioned in the service and we never passed around a bucket. We our one, what do we even call that thing in the back?
The box.
The box in the back. We had in the worst spot, partially because I knew most of our people were giving online. So it's we never stressed it. But here's what happened. When church planters, we always have, pastors in general, but one reason why you plant a church is hopefully to reach non-believers. And I just kind of have that philosophy that of all the priorities, all the obstacles people have to coming to church, I didn't want money to be the obstacle. So it's hey, you can still have, a warped view of money, but I want you to be comfortable here so you can hear about the gospel of Jesus Christ and then slowly you transform. The problem with that thinking is if you do that every week, what about the people who've been there for a while? You never actually address it. So it's like a great philosophy for the newcomer who's come that Sunday, but it never actually serves your congregation over the long haul. So yeah, we barely talked about it. Looking at the numbers, we averaged about I mentioned that on Sunday. We averaged about $4,000 a month in giving. And most people, you can't even survive just their own family off of $4,000, let alone a church family. So we made it work. The Lord provided. But yeah, I was terrified to talk about it.
Yeah.
It was a scary thing.
Yeah, I think when you look at people who've experienced, especially lately, I mean, there's a lot of depth to generosity and the attachment we have to money with security and things like that. Because I think in a lot of ways, talking about generosity is like simplicity in that it reveals a lot of your like deeper underlying like idols and things like that. But when I think about church hurt specifically, people who are maybe I would categorize this as like legitimate church hurt, as in like there was dysfunction or what's the word I'm looking for? Like
abuse of funds.
Yeah, abuse of something within like the leadership structure of a church or something like that. I see the two areas being largely something related to finances, how the church stewards money, specifically like the pastoral team or the lead pastor, whatever. And then separately, something about like authority and sexuality. So some kind of like amalgamation of those two things. And so when you talk about money, people are coming in with their own individual experiences with churches and finances that can either be really good or like really, really bad. So you're trying to address something like when we do Sabbath, no one, I mean, maybe if you deal with burnout, things like that, but like no one, I can't think of a church that's abused the concept of rest, giving people rest, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of stories of people who have experienced church abusing like generosity, being manipulative in how they talk about money and things like that. So you're trying to address a practice of Jesus that can trigger two very different responses from two people in your exact same congregation.
Yeah. And I think the other side of it is twofold, where one is it does make people upset. So like you'll hear feedback maybe quicker, versus any other topic you can preach on. Like after service, it's less, hey, thank you for that. And hey, I was bothered by that. So that's fun. But even more than that, I think preaching on it is it's a very vulnerable thing to do for a preacher, because you really, okay, let's put it this way. When I preach on Sabbath, I really want our people to practice Sabbath. I believe it's a biblical principle. It's a wonderful way to live. The beauty is that I can't really tell if they did it or not. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not going to every house, oh good, they Sabbathed on Thursday, or they did a Saturday Sabbath. So there's like a freedom of like, maybe I'm a good communicator. Maybe they are all doing it. Mm-hmm. Who knows? And I'll never know. With generosity, it's more on like a spreadsheet where it's like, well, you talked about giving and absolutely nothing changed in your budget. So either your people are perfect, which can be, nobody's perfect, but either your church is already generous, so what was the point of that series? Or you didn't even move the needle at all. So I'm making sure not to think that way, but I'm just saying I know that could be a temptation. Mm-hmm. And I can easily say it's not like we looked at our budget and went, man, we need extra giving. Let's do a generosity series. We planned this 18 months ago. Mm-hmm. In fact, you know what I'm saying? Like, I hope people, I don't know. Yeah,
that's the other temptation when you're communicating it too, is you want to make sure it doesn't feel gimmicky. I think that's what I'm getting at as well. So like because you can measure it, and because there is a direct benefit that we receive personally by people practicing generosity versus like the benefit we receive from them doing like scripture reading is like,
personally, right?
Yeah, personally, that doesn't really add much.
And I know that guilt trips are helpful. Hear me longer. Yeah. Helpful in a moment. Like if we had a building campaign and we just need $100,000 more, then we're completely debt free.
Yeah,
you can just guilt trip. Like, hey guys, if y'all just did this, we'd be debt free.
Come on.
Let's do it one time.
Yeah.
But guilt trip doesn't help somebody over the long haul.
Right.
So it's one way to get something done. But that's why I do like. I'm not against building campaigns. I pray we have one soon. Mm-hmm. I love that in the middle of this practice series, we don't have that kind of pressure. It's not like we're giving towards something, because I don't want there to be a guilt offering. I want it to be a grace offering.
I had this horrible image of as you're saying that, our set the table thing, and instead of ping pong balls, it's just cash. So it's like we put like a measurement there.
Well, they always do that thermometer.
Yeah, it would have been an easy way for us to, like, we could have applied that same thinking. But yeah, it's like we started with.
That's a good point. We'd rather be people who measured table, dinner, hospitality conversations than how much cash you put in.
Cash flow, yeah. I think that's why we also started with greed, like addressing the underlying issue. Is that is genuinely why we chose this as a practice, because what we're after is like to counter the way of the world, to counter the formative ways that you're already dealing with your money and your schedule and things like that. So, but yeah, it's hard. It's fun.
So,
and you have to do you're doing all of it. So I don't have to do any of the preaching on money.
Yeah. So you can just everybody can blame me. This will be great. Lonely at the top. No, I'm just kidding. That's what Jace keeps telling me.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go through the message a little bit. Obviously not just rehash it, but let's kind of talk about some categories. Maybe we didn't have enough time. I knew we kind of threw a lot at him again. It wasn't as long as last week by 2 minutes. And so let's start with, can we actually emphasize, because that's just how I started, and I think it's just worth mentioning. I don't know if you can say it enough. These practices are not to gain right standing with God, but it's to maintain right living with God. I already gave my pitch on that. What's some of your verbiage? How do you think about that? I love your your words about it's not a means to an end. It's not an end, it's a means to an end.
Yeah, the practices, all of our practices are a means to an end. They're not the end themselves. And I probably stole that language from somebody else, but I think it's really easy to turn this into something like Project Self, where this is all just a self-development plan to get better at being a person. Or it's really easy for these to turn into like trying to manipulate God. Like maybe my life is going poorly because I don't read my Bible or give enough. So we would always argue, and it's helpful. I think every practice we've always tried to mention that this is not a way you are already in right standing with God.
If you put your faith and trust in Him.
If you put your faith and trust in Jesus, you are already in right standing with God based on what Jesus has done for you and your response to that.
But what's amazing about something like generosity is you can say all day you trust Him, but something like generosity really shows if you do trust Him or not. So that's what that's the line that we're obviously, try not to muddy, as I said, but it is a helpful way of actually knowing.
Yeah. And that's why, like, I think about the rich young ruler a lot. Like, what if that had been, why was it wealth that was his thing? Why wasn't, I mean, I'm sure the Gospels are selected stories, so there were probably people that approached Jesus, but there could have been somebody else that approached Jesus, and instead of money and their wealth being their one thing, maybe it was like their kids or like their marriage or some other something that they're holding such a deep root on their heart that God.
Well, that one was, let me go first bury my father.
Yeah, there's that. That's true. Which had to do with,
AKA, I want to be with my family and gain his inheritance.
So it's also money. Exactly. So there's a thread there, and that's in Matthew. So
yeah.
I think about that a lot. Like, it's what we're after is like, because what Jesus is after, I think, is like this. And again, it gets weird when you use this language, but like this devotion to Him, this like loyalty, because what Jesus comes announcing is that He's a king bringing a kingdom. And if you're going to follow Jesus, that means like yielding to Him as a king and letting Him structure and reorder your life, and you respond to that. So generosity is a way for us to respond to that.
Well, I love that Proverbs 11:24 line. The world of the generous gets larger and larger. The world of the stingy gets smaller and smaller. That's light living. This is the joyful life. Like, one of the biggest issues in modern day is we only view salvation as, what is it saving me from, rather than also what is it saving me to? What is it actually leading me to? And we love to talk about eternal life. Zoe life is not just the next life, it's also abundance in the here and now. And again, people confuse on what abundance actually means, and go back to week 2 about prosperity gospel versus poverty and all of that. So Luke 16 is one of the most confusing parables. Do you agree why it can be seen as confusing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a weird story because you have a manager. It's a parable Jesus tells of this manager who is in trouble with his boss, and so he uses deception and deception regarding money to get out of it. And it seems like that would be a warning, like a cautionary parable, but Jesus actually uses this man as an example for something. So the trick is figuring out what it is he's commending the man for.
I really love that example from Jesus, because what I like to do is to see things in the world and obviously name the sin, the arrogance, the mistakes, but also learning from everybody. You know, like we have a book right now, you and me are about to read, called Be Our Guest. And it's like, how does Disney create a hospitable environment and the flow and how the words they use? And it's like, in some tribes or some worlds of thought, you should never, ever learn from them about anything. They're just terrible. Sure. But it's like, oh, you can learn something from everybody. Now, of course, there needs to be orthodoxy. You need to make sure it's, you know, that you can be formed by the world without even noticing. So that's in the context of you being saturated in Scripture. I love that line. Our desire is not just for us to think about Scripture, but to think Scripture. But I think it's a process. It's a sign of maturity when you're able to learn from somebody like a corrupt, lazy, deceitful steward like this man in Luke 16.
Yeah. I was reading, I was just curious, did you read Eugene Peterson's translation of this?
You know, I usually do. I don't think I did this time.
Here's what he says. At the end of the parable, he said, now here's the surprise. So he tells the whole story. The manager uses the money, all that stuff. The master praised the crooked manager. And why? Because he knew how to look after himself. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are on constant alert, looking for angles, surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials, so you'll really live, and not complacently just get by on good behavior. Really interesting. But yeah, it's that same idea. He's like, take what this is how unrighteous people live. There's something to learn there, but use it for a better means, which is using your wealth to be generous and things like that. I
think a good balance is Jesus's other line, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Or some translations say shrewd, which is that same word, be shrewd as serpents. So, you know, I mean, knowing the biblical narrative, serpent, Genesis 3, like to even say, hey, like, you know how the serpent is wise and cunning, there's actually something to learn from there. And so the whole idea is to leverage the moment you have. Don't waste it. Be wise with your resources. I don't know if I'm going to share this story, so maybe the podcast listeners will hear it twice. I'm always so fearful of that, but I'm realizing I'm missing out talking about things because I'm so worried I'm going to maybe say it. So next podcast is just going to be long. But Randy Alcorn, who has 2 great, maybe even 3 great books. I've read 2 of them on giving. One is The Treasure Principle, and the other one is Giving is the Good Life. He gives this really good illustration, I think in both, about imagine that you lived during the Civil War and you lived in the South. And you went back and forth from the South to the North. And so you had Confederacy coins and then you had the Union coins. And you know, you had the inside scoop that the North was going to win. What you're going to do with those Southern coins, you're going to transfer them. You're going to spend them. You're going to, say, no, I need the Union coins because this is about to be pointless. In that same way, like leveraging, understanding this money we have, it's about to be pointless. You can't take this treasure in heaven, but you can have treasure in heaven depending on how you spend this now, So we know how this battle's going to win. We know the next life versus this one. And so using that principle, another easier, modern day is like, I still just hit myself because that's a weird phrase. Beat myself up? I'm so bad at idioms. Bitcoin. Like I remember somebody telling me about Bitcoin in 2011. If only I knew,
Yeah.
But it's like, if we trust in the word of God, this is the greatest investment. Why aren't we investing in that? And so in Luke 16, I really love how he says, you make friends through wealth. And Proverbs says that. Life says that. But then he says, you make eternal friends through wealth. And what an opportunity. And you do that by giving to the kingdom, giving. This is sometimes, to the local church. This is also to like specific missionaries, which by the way, if you give to our church, 10% of our money goes to missions to support missionaries all throughout the world, giving to charities. There's all sorts of different ways that you can give. But Also, what I've been thinking about more and more, I think we operate so much in the what we can see. We sometimes feel like giving to a charity that gives food is more important. I'm not here to say it's not, but we see, let's give a lot to that, versus like a church where a lot of what a church does or a missionary does is operating in the unseen realm, saving souls. Like, it's so much easier to count the amount of sandwiches you passed out versus like souls being formed into the way of Jesus. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, it's tough. I think some of that will probably end up in next week's conversation about tithing and things like that. I think
this isn't to put down charities at all.
No, totally. But I even think of like, the story that Alex and Julie shared on Sunday. To me, it is kind of related because this is something Alex said, is that it's so much easier. And he read from Galatians where Paul encourages the church in Galatia to like look out for one each other, basically, within the household of faith, is the language that he uses. And Alex's point was that it's so easy to like want it. When you think of generosity, you think of the big things that are out there. So the things that make you kind of feel good because you see the direct result of like giving to a charity, which is all good. And we should do that. And we do that and things like that. But there's also a responsibility we have to like giving within the community that you're a part of, knowing that you might not ever see how that money gets you. It's almost like the homeless person principle. Like, that's a reason a lot of people don't, give to the street beggar, on the corners, because they know, or they assume they know how that person's going to use the money. Mm-hmm. And what we're after is like two sides of that. It's like, one, there is an element of like being smart with who you give to and things like that. You should kind of know. But also the practice of generosity is first just a practice of letting go. So like generosity is hard because we're letting go of control. So I would argue it's almost something else if you're practicing generosity only by giving to things that you have control over. Yeah. Like how to measure sandwiches or whatever, like whatever. If you're only giving to things that you have control over or see a direct result to or whatever, like something specific. Yeah. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that's not generosity, but I would say that is like maybe only half of what generosity really is. Which is why we wanted week 3 to be about stewardship versus ownership. So when you're an owner, you feel a little bit more control of where it goes and how it goes, and you need a spreadsheet on how productive it was. A steward has a sense of freedom. I'm going to make investments, but at the end of the day, like we said, we described a steward that you see throughout the Bible. A steward is a slave, but he's a slave to the master, but a king to everybody else. So pretty sweet gig. I know, the slavery that you would consider back then. I think a lot of us assume slavery like when we say American slavery, that's we believe is a different concept. But so this slave, he lives in the house. Joseph was able to do all sorts of things, right? So being a steward, what a great understanding of your money when it's like, I'm even realizing it's not my money, like it's not like 10% of it is God's money, 90% of it is mine. A more robust understanding is 100% of all that I own, and who I am in general is God's. I'm just a steward of it. There's just a sense of release. I think it helps us with our attachment to money. If we think it's ours, if we start from that point of view, it's very hard to let it go. Yeah, it's and I was thinking of this when you were talking about Jesus sort of redeeming the negative qualities, the deceitfulness of the manager. It's because I don't know what I want to say. This is like Thomas Aquinas or someone basically argued that like everything that's sinful is a warped version of something that's originally meant to be good. C.S. Lewis says that too, but I imagine took it from and the idea of stewardship goes back to the garden. So like Adam and Eve, like I think all of this really goes back to the original mandate given to humanity. When God puts Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, their purpose is to steward God's creation. So they don't own creation. Mm-hmm. God gives them ownership over, they have authority over it. They have rule over it. They have control over it, but it's not theirs. They don't have ownership over it. Yeah. And their job is to cultivate it and basically like increase what they've been given charge of so that the garden kind of expands and God's presence goes out and things like that. And that mandate goes to Israel when Israel is a nation. Their job is to steward what God does give them so that they can spread, the goodness and presence of God to the nations around them. Mm. And so like when you look at someone like the deceitful manager, what he's doing is warping that idea for self-gain. And so like Jesus redeeming what's good about that is like that inherent like impulse we have to like that ambition, basically, that inherent impulse towards ambition to build something for ourselves, wealth or whatever, is meant to be a good thing redirected towards like advancing the kingdom and things like that. Yeah.
You know, like, what was it in 2020? We all got like that extra stipend, or I forgot what we coined it, but like, because we had 3 kids under 6, like it was nice. It was a good little bonus. That was so easy for me to, when looking at that money, both to spend it, to give it, and to save it. Like all 3 categories was like so simple. Like I was able to just view it as a math equation, and we use it to pay off debt a lot. We used, you know, and it was like, because I knew I didn't own this. I didn't earn this. This was just bonus, you know? Now, some people would take a bonus and just say, hey, let's just party. Let's just use all of it for wasteful spending. So, again, being a steward still has that sense of accountability, too. I'm imagining when we're thinking the opposite of owner, probably the exact opposite of owner isn't a steward. It's like a... You know what I'm saying? You see the language I'm trying to go here? Because stewardship still implies some accountability and like you using it well rather than just wasteful spending like the prodigal son. Anyways, did you ever get to read the John Reinhardt book yet about gospel patrons? I suggest everybody to read this book, including Pastor Caleb. It's a really good book. I loved it. There's just like 3 or 4 stories in there. And we mentioned it on Sunday, and we wanted to really bring it home, that emphasis that you can steward your money or you can stew on your money. And so I loved this book, The Gospel Patrons. It really opened my vision of what giving can do. And what I liked about it is I think sometimes we can talk about generosity and we can almost make people feel bad for being wealthy. And it was cool that this book was actually like, no, we need more wealthy people in here. You know, like we need more wealthy people in the kingdom. And to use some of that money to just do incredible things. So like, Lady Huntington, it didn't imply that she was like living in a box because she gave all her money away. She still lived, like she was still able to be in company with the rich, but she did give over 50% of what she made to kingdom efforts, to start churches, to help Whitfield with all of his missionary journeys. So I don't know. I really appreciated that idea. Because we look at like, hey, how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. And we take it so far where it's like, hey, there shouldn't be any rich among us. And I know there's pushback to that, but also like in reading 2 Corinthians 8 this week, like there are supposed to be in a congregation, poor and rich, and the rich sacrifice so that the poor aren't poor. But also the rich need, it's wise for the rich to keep making that money so they can continue to help people. Like I just remember, we've talked about this before, but the poverty gospel mentality, you almost can get into a camp where you just think making money in general is just the worst thing. But man, what a gift you can be to the kingdom and for kingdom efforts.
Yeah, there's a high responsibility that wealthy people have. I don't want to say a higher responsibility, but in terms of wealth, I think, they have a higher responsibility than someone who just doesn't have wealth.
It requires immense maturity.
Yes. Yeah. You have to be a very mature person to follow Jesus with your wealth well. And that's why, like, I love that we did communion on Sunday, where Paul is in that passage. Paul, and we talked about this last week too. I think there's a breakdown of the hierarchies that exist in the world when you enter the space of the church. So, like, your wealth in the church does not determine your value or your level of influence or importance within the church. So, like, just because you have money doesn't mean that you can run the church or, take advantage of people, things like that. It doesn't earn you a seat at the table. What earns you a seat at the table is Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, which also earns the poor person the same seat at the table.
Yes.
So when you free yourself from that mentality of like your value coming from your wealth, then it's like a shift in mindset, basically, where like someone like Lady Huntington sees her wealth, her purpose in life is not to like live the lifestyle of the rich. It's to use her wealth to like, benefit the kingdom. And like that, I think, has a lot to do with how we see ourselves within church. And communion is a beautiful picture of what that looks like. Like around the table, everyone has the same seat. The poor people aren't serving communion. They're taking it, just like the wealthy people.
But like, praise the Lord, she has a large home so she can host a lot of people to do a Bible study and a gathering and to make non-believers feel at home. So we just fall into several ditches when we just try to simplify things. So I thought it was a great book. I encourage everybody it's even on Audible, and I even heard there's a free PDF of the book online. So go ahead and grab that. The other thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about a little bit more was two more things. Okay. So one is when Jesus says it, the Father says, if I can trust you with little, then I can trust you with much, right? If you're faithful with few, you can be faithful with much. And we were talking about, because I've heard a lot of people give feedback. Hey, that was really cool. Some people are sharing stories that when they gave, all of a sudden they had more money. They're like, what about my situation? I gave and I have less money, and now I'm actually in a really bad predicament. And so what I love about the less versus much, I think a too simple interpretation of that passage, because you see him comparing the children of this age with the children of light, and little and much, and darkness and light. He's actually comparing material wealth to spiritual wealth, essentially, and maturity. And so we argued the vitality of your life and leadership is directly correlated to your mentality on money and possessions. So I would encourage somebody who feels like, hey, they're giving and life's getting harder. He's training you to be more fruitful in the ministry God has given you. So it can be a formal, pastoral, deacon-related ministry position, or it can just be the ministry of being a dad and a mom and a good neighbor and a really good coworker. But when you do that, you're learning the principles of faithful ministry, because faithful ministry, often you can't see the results right away. It's so much operating in the realm of the spiritual invisible. And it's always an act of trust. Like, to lead people towards the way of Jesus is humbling. It's hard. It requires perseverance. And all of those principles are learned when you know how to be faithful with material possessions. God will grow you up to be faithful with like ministry type positions.
That is not a promise that if you give a large amount of money to our church, we're going to bring you on staff or anything. So disclaimer for our legal team.
Yes. That's your job, I think.
I know, it's just the legal disclaimers, which we've never needed more than when we've talked about money. Yeah, I love that you use Barnabas as an example. The first time we see Barnabas in the story of the church in Acts is when he's donating, tithing, whatever, practicing generosity with, because doesn't he sell a field?
Yeah.
He sells his property.
Yep.
And then the following story,
at the apostles' feet.
Yeah, the following story is the famous Ananias and Sapphira, who also give a large portion of their money, which is interesting. I'm surprised we haven't talked about that.
What an interesting connection.
We haven't talked about that, yeah.
Did Ananias and Sapphira see the anointing over Barnabas and say, we want that, so I'm going to do the same exact thing, but I'm actually going to keep some of it myself, and I'm going to act like I gave it all like Barnabas did?
I think that's possible. Certainly.
It's literally the very next story.
The exact same, like, it's broken up by chapters in our Bible, but
people's minds it's separated, but it's not.
But yeah, I think there's, because a huge through line throughout the book of Acts, a huge thread is this theme of like, true godly gospel power compared to like worldly power.
Yes.
And how you saw that with Simon the sorcerer. You're going to see it in the text I'm preaching on in a couple of weeks with this sorcerer, Bar Jesus, who like claims to have this power, but he's combative and things like that. And Paul has the real power, true generosity that's empowered by the Holy Spirit in Barnabas versus false generosity empowered by selfish ambition. For Ananias and Sapphira. So the story is that they give their field as well, and they present what they say is all of the proceeds or something like that to the church, and they get struck down, not because they didn't give enough, but because they were misrepresenting their generosity.
They were misusing. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's possible. But yeah, there is that principle. I think it's the shift in mindset from...
Which I love that story because it shows giving is about the heart.
Yes.
It's not about the amount.
Yeah. And Peter says, wasn't that money was yours to do whatever you wanted with?
Yes. You didn't have to lie.
Why did you lie about you giving more than you actually did? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I love that. Even Peter's like, you didn't have to give any of it. You
did this to yourself.
Yeah. This is your, yeah.
But I will share another story.
Yeah.
I remember going to a Southern Baptist convention, and there was a very famous pastor who was being interviewed. and he shared his own tithing journey. And he said, when him and his wife got married, they decided each and every year they're going to increase their giving no matter what. So they started at 10%. They said some years they would increase it by 0.2 percentage. Other years it'd be a whole percent. But they knew, like, man, if I'm going to be faithful in ministry, I need to be faithful in money. And so then he wound up writing one of the greatest selling books of all time. And he said, and I thought it was it was a pretty interesting line. He said, do you know why my book has sold over 50 million copies? And so, the crowd's like, oh, I wonder why. He said, it's because the Lord knew what I would do with the money. So at that point, he said we were already at like 18% of our income, and that was us making not much. Then all of a sudden, millions of dollars came his direction, and he had I've been working on this. I've been fighting the god of mammon my whole life. We know what to do with this. And they gave, so now he's famous for living off of 10% of his income. He does the reverse tithe. But so it's like, yeah, that's just kind of how the Lord works. But also that's not a guarantee. We try to turn everything to a formula. Oh, great. I'm going to get a lot of money by increasing my percentage
or I'm going to have a bigger platform or more social media followers, more influence. If earthly influence is different from monetary influence, maybe that just means more people like me, or more people know who I am, know my name, which also isn't what we're saying. But I think we are naturally drawn towards generous people because they just intrinsically reflect God's nature. Yeah. So like you think about people that you are naturally drawn to, they're not obsessed with material things.
And they live with open hands.
Exactly.
With people and with possessions.
And I think that is a character trait of God. God is generous, not stingy. And because we're drawn to that, it's because we're drawn to God. That character. So like if you learn how to steward your money well and you become a generous person, I think the promise Jesus is making isn't that you're going to have a large platform necessarily. Maybe like for this pastor.
Well, we would argue fruitful first and foremost is character.
Yeah.
Like you will become more like Christ.
Yeah.
And bless those who are around you. There's no guarantee of anything else, how many people are around you, what kind of money you make, but like you will grow to become like Christ, and that is the greatest treasure.
You think of somebody like, again, I'm thinking of, I noticed you didn't name who that was. So I don't know what to name, but
I don't know why, people. So,
yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Know who it is.
Yeah. But Eugene Peterson, did you like bleep it out?
He's even more controversial than this guy.
I guess so now. Yeah.
More towards the end of his life.
Crazy.
But I think there's reasons. But anyways.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah. So his I think shaped, for me personally, I would probably say for you as well, he's in like the trifecta of people who have shaped how I view pastoral ministry the most.
My trifecta, absolutely.
So annoying. I don't know why I didn't see that coming.
You teed it up, brother.
Yeah.
I'm done. You're done. We had a coach come over and train us on some organizational things all week, and he said it was so funny to see your reaction when I would pull those things. He goes, he's obviously comfortable around you. Like, he's very open about how dumb that was. So anyways, our trifecta of pastors, what about him?
Eugene Peterson has influenced me deeply in his vision of what a pastor is and what a pastor's role should be and things like that. And his church famously, or maybe not famously, infamously, never grew to like he didn't have like a mega church. He was pastoring a church of like 500 people or something.
Yeah, and that was like at most he would ever scratch that number.
Yeah, and it wasn't by design. It was just because of his nature. But I think his influence is obviously reverberated, and he made a ton of money off of books and things like that, I'm sure. But like when I think about what influence, you're like, yeah. When I think about influence, I think the posture that he has towards like being receptive for things like that that's kind of what I mean.
Yeah. And I'm going to segue it to this. So I want us to end to talk about the practice for this week. Mm-hmm. And I just want to encourage our people, faithful with little, faithful with much. I think it's one thing to be, what's the line John Tyson uses? To resonate with a message. It's another thing to be repentant with the message and actually do something. So I want to encourage people to, if you have your booklets, to actually read and do this week, if you haven't already, pages 20 through 22. Pages 20 talks about the possibility of making a budget, because the reality is a lot of us don't have margin. Stewards are actually supposed to make margin for the sake of the poor, for those around them. And And so you put in bold lines, simply put, we have no margin, and yet God still holds us accountable to serve others generously. So the two kind of practices, the challenges this week is first of all, consider these 8 principles of budgeting. So I'm going to mention them out loud. Number 1, and this is adapted from both Richard Foster and Jason Mayfield.
Yeah.
So number 1, buy things for their usefulness, not their status. That would help a lot, like in the realm of vehicles and shoes and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Number
Clothes.
2, reject buying anything that produces or feeds an addiction within you. So you need to stop drinking coffee. Number 3.
You know where this comes into play? And you have
Give me a good example.
your hands in this world more than I do, but like the gadget sort of techie, gear heads, things like that.
And it's never like there's always a new.
Yeah.
That used to be me with the phone. Now I'm like, oh, there's another announcement. Like I really don't care. But I remember being so excited about for the iPhone 10. That was such a big deal. Number 3, develop a habit of giving your stuff away rather than selling it. I'm good at this because I hate selling. So we did our simplicity practice. I just threw everything out. I could give it to Goodwill or friends. And now, like for the last 12 months, I'm like, where's that thing I really needed? Oh, I just gave it away. So that's fun. Number 4, don't upgrade your entire life at once. I was given this advice when I got married, and that was helpful. He said, we went broke because we tried to get all the furniture on day 1. So he said, don't do that. So don't upgrade at once. Number 5, buy things that will last, not things you'll have to replace often. So I've already given that illustration. Don't get the dumb, cheap phone case. Get a good one. Then you want, or the sunglasses. There's all sorts of examples.
Yeah.
Or I know what you're thinking. The coffee blender. Is that even a thing? Blender? That's not the word.
It's not a blender. It's a grinder.
Grinder. Yeah. See?
I live by this motto. My life it's probably not healthy. But.
No, I think it's a good counterbalance because I don't think church people should be cheap people,
I think that combined with number 1 is a good, yeah.
Number 6, pay cash for everything you can. Admittedly, I don't do this well. Like, I just don't carry cash, but I'm pretty good at knowing exactly what's in my account and what is wise in the budget and what we are allowed to spend on things.
There's not debit versus credit?
The principle, then yes.
Yeah.
Then I do that, but I don't have literal cash.
Sure. Yeah.
There's some places that don't even take cash anymore.
Yeah. So I guess if you're in a group,
deeper principle.
If you're in a group and you're reading this and your pushback is well, I don't carry cash, and all these people, the principle is use what's in your checking account, not your credit account, how much credit you have. Yeah.
Which leads to number 7, don't spend money that you don't have.
Yeah.
Especially on anything, but the crazy one is vacations. It's that's it's not even an investment, you're digging yourself in a hole. And man, this is so true. Number 8, nothing you buy is as good as you think.
Buyer's remorse.
Yes. Wow. Way to bring it back. All right. So then we encourage you to do very easy, moderate, or hard practices. Okay. So choose one of these to help you make margin. The very easy. Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah.
Pastor Caleb, what's the very easy practice that they can do this week?
Just reflect on those. So read them, but spend some time thinking about which ones you naturally live by and which ones you feel resistance towards. So if there's one that you immediately kind of dismiss as well, that's dumb. And dig into that. Why do you think that's dumb? What's in your life that's preventing you from, living that out?
Cool. Number 2, easy.
Create an actual budget based on your current spending habits and rhythms if you don't already have one. So if you've never lived by a budget, create one based on what you actually do, not what you want to do. Tons of apps that can help with that.
So we've actually really enjoyed the Every Dollar app from Ramsey. And fun fact, I have a free gift card because somebody from Ramsey visited us this week. And so I wonder if I should do a giveaway at church. But who would want it? But it's a year-long subscription to use the Every Dollar app for free.
Oh, that's fun.
So it connects to your account and it tells you what you have been spending. That's so nice because then it's so hard to categorize. No, it reads it for you. It goes, here's what you're spending, blah, blah, blah.
I use Rocket Money. It
Nice.
does the same kind of thing. We should do a fundraiser. Whoever can give the most after to our church gets this gift card.
This is why we don't go live.
It's a joke.
All right. Also, notice that word rhythms. So hard to spell. I just don't know how to spell it, but I think it's spelled correctly on here.
That's what you wanted to point out about
We already,
rhythms?
yeah.
Yeah.
Remember we talked about that this week.
It is hard to spell.
Moderate. What's a moderate thing that, you know what, people are feeling? They're feeling like they can do something difficult. This is too easy. Give me a challenge.
Maybe I would say this is you if you already have and kind of live by a budget. So analyze that budget. Look at what your optional expenses are, including big ticket items like car payments, vacations, mortgage, etc., and small ticket items, subscriptions, media, eating out, all that stuff. Some questions to ask: what's taking up your margin? So again, we frame this whole thing as like some of us don't have the margin to be generous because we've taken up our financial space on maybe some things that we don't actually need. Where could you free yourself up to create more margin? So again, think like something challenging but doable. What in your bank statement are you the most resistant to giving up? So actually pulling out your bank statement and seeing some recurring things or whatever, like what is it that you feel the most attachment to actually like give a name to it and a price point and things like that. So that's like moderate. Again, if you have a budget and you already kind of live by it, or you generally live by a budget, I would challenge you to do something like this.
And I think it's good for everyone to think this through, like before you buy that car, before you go on the vacation, right? So, like we don't want to do this again to condemn people. Like I just have had conversations. They want to be generous. And I think I've said this on the podcast before, but just their mortgage and car payments alone makes it impossible. They're barely eating. Mm-hmm. Also, I think it's very important for us to be as vulnerable as possible with these practices. The biggest issue my family has gone through, we're great on mortgage. We bought this at the right time. We refinanced. Like we're doing really well on mortgage.
Yeah.
Our car payments, we paid a car off. The one that we drove, and then it broke. So then we sold it, took all of that profit to pay towards the truck I do have. We're driving another vehicle. It's not even my own. We're doing pretty good on vehicles. It's food, man. Food is my week. Like the amount, when you look at the budget and see how much money I spent on restaurants, it's not good. So that's to say I am not perfect at this practice. I am consistently generous. In fact, I think you can't be a pastor if you're not. It's one of the qualifications to manage your finances well, not to be a lover of money. But like I do think it really does hurt my family at times for savings, to get out of debt faster, and to bless people randomly because of how much we go out to eat. And I justify it. We go out to eat with other people. So like it's community. I'm so good at like saying it's
justifying
okay.
Sin.
Yes, just totally good at justifying that sin. So we've taken a lot of efforts to be better at that. All that to say, we're probably going to go out to eat somewhere after this.
You didn't have to say that.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I think that's helpful to tell people, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to come across as like, we're perfect at this, you aren't. Or I don't want to say like, you can't ever enjoy life. Like I'm just so scared of all the, it's another reason why people are afraid to talk about money.
Yeah.
Legalists can take this series and ruin it. Licentiousness can take this series and ruin it. So we're just trusting that God is working in your life at the pace that the Holy Spirit wants to work in you. So
yeah.
Did I go too far there? All
No.
right, let's talk about hard. What would be a hard thing to do?
This would be, and again, I think some of these are interchangeable. Some people might not find this difficult at all. Create an aspirational budget based on the 8 principles listed above. So those 8 ones we just covered. Dream big and imagine what your budget might look like if you create enough room to give until it actually hurts a bit. So if you have an existing budget, you're on board, you want to actually like start being generous and systematizing that generosity. Create a new budget where you give based on those 8 principles, and to where it like limits your capacity to spend on things like eating out or big vacations or whatever. Again, not even vacations are bad. Like there's just a method of, I think an obsession that some of us get. We all have our thing, right? Like everyone's got a thing. For you, it's eating out. For other people, it might be like the big vacations or the car that you have to have or whatever, the boat, so you can go, play hard or whatever.
Yeah, it's vehicles, man. Like I've fallen for it. We've made some really bad decisions with vehicles in the past, and I just hate that. I just hate that they're not affordable. And maybe maybe I'm opening up too much. Like maybe my prayer is that you'd be able, when I was in college, I actually loved listening to the Dave Ramsey Show. And then after college, we were put in hard situations where we had to do, I felt, again, this is an excuse. And it became hard to listen to the Dave Ramsey Show because I was like, oh, wait, I'm 24 and still have the issues. Like when I was 21, I thought once I graduate, get a real job, this won't be a problem. So it became difficult for me to listen to things like money, to actually sit in front of a budget and see where I'm going wrong. But what is, what is this? M. Scott Peck, mental health is embracing reality. Like, I think it's really important for us just to say, okay, here's where we're actually at. God has grace for us. He loves us, but our perception of reality is running and often ruining our lives. We just have to get honest, just even as a family, and go, here's where we can get better at.
Yeah. And again, these are a means to an end. So our short-term goal, I would say, if you look at all of these practices, all of these potentially will target an area of greed in your life. So our short-term end goal is for all of us in this community to loosen the grip that greed has on our hearts. Mm-hmm. And so like when you put it in that context, we're not trying to raise more money for our church, although that'd be nice. And that is, we need to do that and things like that. But our end goal short term for this practice, specifically for this 4-week series, is really just to, I would say, loosen the grip that greed has on our hearts. And when you use that framework, it's easier to see these as like, these are a means to that end.
We've put our trust in God that he's going to take care of our church.
Yeah.
And so that's why we can say that, I think, in honesty. But I do think of people like, hey, there's certain people we could bless more, or there's certain opportunities we can do if we had more. But I know that's in the Lord's hands. But what we do feel is responsible of giving the warning. You know what I wish? If we had a 5th week to preach on 1 Timothy 6, Paul has such a great just tapestry of what greed can do to you, but also what money can do for the kingdom. It's a really, I've been trying to figure out where to place it, and it's almost like a good summary.
We could do a 5th week.
Oh, wow. All right. Comment below. What's the comment? They're doing good at this still. They come all the way to the end.
Are they commenting?
This is a long podcast. So if they comment this phrase.
5th week.
Trifecta.
No. Fine.
Okay. No. Okay. 5th week. Actually, 5th week makes more sense. Like, do you want a 5th week?
Yeah.
Or trifecta, or both. What they've been doing is finding a ways to take both phrases into a sentence. It's been wonderful to
Interesting.
watch.
I need to read the comments more. Sorry.
All right. Well,
I think you should have started that music earlier.
I know. We'll just cut it. Bye.